All right. This is the Story Series podcast where we tell the stories behind the people. Paul Falcone, welcome.
Thank you, Brandon. Pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you. So just for people who don't know, you've held senior HR positions at prominent companies like Nickelodeon, Paramount Pictures, NBC Universal. You're now a keynote speaker, a best-selling author. There's so much I want to get into, but I'd love to start with origin stories. So if you wouldn't mind, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I went to high school in Manhattan, and then I came out to go to UCLA, and I never looked back. I love Southern California, so that's my story.
And so when you were in high school and you were deciding where to study, how did you come to that decision of a college?
That's a long story, but I can do it for you in about 20 seconds. So I had gone to a Jesuit military school in Manhattan. Xavier was the name of it. For people from New York, they'll know it. And my goal at the time was to go to the Naval Academy. I wanted to get my nomination to go to Annapolis. So I figured I'm going to go to the military school, which was great. By the time I got to my senior year, I still kind of wanted to go to Annapolis, but I thought I was going to become a Jesuit priest. I was a confused child. It's okay. So I applied to Georgetown. Got accepted to Georgetown, which was good. But my backup school was UCLA. And I just thought, you know what? The whole picture of the Beach Boys, California sun, the whole 9 yards. And that was kind of where I was. I just thought I was too early in my life to make a decision to commit to the military for 9 years or to commit to the Jesuits for the rest of my life. And I just thought, I'm going to go to a school and just have a little fun. And I had a great time at UCLA. It was a wonderful experience.
And what was your major when you transferred?
I was a German major, which was interesting because I'm Italian, which is a whole nother story. But the bottom line was my uncle was in General Patton's army, the Third Army, during the Battle of the Bulge. He was the best storyteller I ever met. And he would tell me all these stories, Brandon, about what his experiences were. And when I went to high school, I said, I'm going to study German because they offered German. And I loved it. And by my junior year, I had won a scholarship to spend a summer in Germany in Nuremberg with a family there. And I stayed in touch with them for 30 years until the parents ultimately passed away. But wonderful experiences there. And then I went to UCLA and it was a no-brainer. It's just like studying English, but you're doing it all in German and you're studying German authors. But again, I loved it. And I stayed on for my master's degree too.
So you were, I want to go back on that. You studied abroad and lived with a family in Germany for how long was that?
It was like a summer. And that was while I was still in high school. Then I spent another summer abroad, University of Regensburg, also in the south, not too far from Bavaria, or Munich, I should say. And that was, again, another summer. But just the experience. I mean, I didn't come from that, being able to go. I was the first one in my family to go to college. So to think I was getting my master's degree from UCLA, I'm studying abroad. It was wonderful. I had a great experience.
So after that, you took your love of German to UCLA, and that was your declared major, you said.
Right.
And what did you think that you were going to do with a German degree?
I had no idea. Nothing. Just to tell you, nothing. Okay. So the funny thing was, when I graduated, all right, I stayed on for the master's. And then it was a question, do I want to do the PhD? Which I could have done at UCLA, but normally at that point, you would go to another school. And I just thought, nah, 2 years in grad school was enough. Between studying the fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm and Goethe and all these different kinds of things, I just thought, you know what, it's time for me to get into the business world. But I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do.
And so how did you come to decide on the business world? Or what did you think the business world meant?
So I started reading books like Swim with the Sharks from Harvey Mackey or McKay, however he pronounces his last name. And I was like, uh-oh. I was always the kid who brought the teacher the apple. So I'm like, how am I going to survive in this? Well, those were exaggerated books. That wasn't really what my experience was, thank goodness. But I went to a recruiting firm and I said, you guys, I don't know what to do. Could you help me find a job? And they said, well, would you want to work here? And I said, doing what? And they said, see that telephone? See those yellow pages? We used to have yellow pages back in the day. You do outbound telephone calls and you reach out to companies and see if we can help them find people for their job openings. Long story short, I stayed there for 6 years and I became their director of sales training. Mm-hmm. And I was working with that, but this is now, just to age myself, this is in the late 80s, early 90s. And it was a tough time. They were dropping bombs on Iraq for the first time. There was a lot going on. The economy wasn't doing well. So I can't say I necessarily wanted to stay there for 6 years, but that's how long it took. Took the 2-year program at UCLA to get my certificate in human resource management. But still, it took some time, Cameron. This stuff, it doesn't, I don't know how to say this. It's like, it doesn't happen overnight. You've just got to be patient sometimes and just wait. And I had to wait. But finally, I got to a point where a client company that knew me through UCLA reached out and said, well, Paul, will you do some search work for us? And I assigned some recruiters to that. The next thing they called me up and they said, we've got an opening. Would you be interested in joining us? So boom, there we went. And I was off to the races and I never looked back again. I really have stayed in HR the whole time and just felt like that was the right place for me to be.
And could you take a moment? I think everybody is vaguely familiar with HR. Every company has an HR department, but could you just break down what that exactly is and does for employees?
Yeah, it's always it's a good question, Brandon. The logic is, if you think about anything you can do to the employees, and from the process of hiring them to paying them to giving them the benefits to training them, career and professional development, and to offboarding them when they leave. It could be a matter of they give notice or they're terminated or they're laid off or whatever can happen to an employee in that span. HR is really the department that helps the company do those things. So we help them with performance reviews. We help them with professional development planning, whatever, workforce planning, whatever the need happens to be.
So it sounds like there's a lot of mentorship in that title, in that position.
When done correctly, there should be. There has to be trust. And I think in some organizations, it's difficult because it's like, managers want to do what they want to get done, but they look at HR as not letting us do it, right? HR never lets us fire anyone around here. Well, it's like, oh, slow down. No, you got to do your job too. I mean, the managers have to know how to do this. So here was my funny trick. When I would go into new companies, I got tired of being the bad guy pretty quickly, and I didn't want to be seen as the obstacle. So what I would do is I would do voluntary management training and do lunch and learns, and I'd bring in the pizza, and I'd say, come, I'm new, but I want to talk to you about what my philosophy is. I want to learn more about your practices. Sometimes only a few people showed up, but I'm good at this stuff. So by the time I did it 3rd, 4th, 5th time, the room was starting to fill up. And what I realized was so many of these people would say the same thing. They'd say, Paul, no one ever taught us this. How come now, we've taken sexual harassment training 35 times in the last 35 years. How come we don't know this stuff? And the answer is because what they're teaching you is legalese, how to avoid sexual harassment. What I'm telling you is here's the script to get ahead of the problem so you can set your expectations for your employees so that it never becomes a problem in the first place.
So where did that come from, this false idea of human resources? Where did that fear come from within the employees who saw you?
No, it wasn't so much the ones who saw me. I think the ones who saw me felt like they can trust me. But sometimes 2 things happen. First of all, I do have to terminate people. That is my job. And as kind as I am to when I do that and I tell people, you know what, thank you for everything you've done. And I'm so sorry it's come to this. But make me your concierge. If there's anything I can help you with, your unemployment application, your COBRA application, you want help with your resume, whatever you need, I'm here for you. I'll always take your call. That's a nice way of telling someone they're fired, but some people can't forgive that. And some people can feel like, you know what, HR is the department of doom. You never want to be called into HR because it only means you're in trouble. And that's not true, but that is something that builds up. And in other organizations, Brandon, where HR people aren't necessarily good at bonding, it can be an us versus them very easily. So you got to kind of manage both the management side, which are your clients, and the employees, the individual contributors. They're your clients too. HR hangs in the balance. But you have to represent the company first. You have to make sure you're keeping the company out of legal trouble and you're trying to create the right space for employees to be able to find traction, find ways of motivating themselves, and hopefully get to a point where the managers rely on you because they know that when they come to you, you're going to give them some good advice.
And by bonding with the employees, you were at least trying to get over this idea that HR is like this faceless department that you need to be afraid of. Let's have a conversation.
Absolutely. And the whole idea of management by walking around, you've got to get out of your office. When people see you, even if it's just a matter to say, hey, Brandon, how are you? Do you need anything? But get used to that. And when people see you, it's like, oh, it's just Paul. But I'll tell you, if you don't come out of your office very often, and then you walk through a department, everyone's, why is HR here? What's going on? And again, that's just drama. We don't need any of that. But again, it's just part of what I think, all of us have our responsibility to build our executive presence, to build our brand, so to speak, our professional brand. For me, the idea of being out there among the troops was critical.
That reminds me of, so my first job in the industry, I was actually placed by a recruiting firm at Hasbro. I was a temp.
Good for
recruiting
you.
firm, it changed everything. I was looking for a job for 6 months. I was back from studying abroad. And I thought that would be enough to get my resume in front of people, and they see that, and then they're going to call me. And, you never know if your resume even gets looked at. But after 6 months of trying and applying and hearing literally nothing, I thought, well, what else can I do? There was a recruiting firm here, or also called a temp agency here in Santa Clarita. And I went to them and I said, hey, here's what I'm looking for. And they said, well, we don't often have entertainment companies, but sometimes we do. And I said, well, sometimes it's better than nothing, because that's how it's been the last 6 months.
That's the spirit.
Yeah. And I said, so sounds good. And I signed up, took the computer test, all that. And they said, okay, well, we have a company called Hasbro. And I thought, oh my gosh,
Wow.
They have an entertainment division. They do movies, they do animation. I said, yep. And I went in and I interviewed. And I remember walking in and they're in Burbank. And I just loved the environment. And I interviewed, was driving home, and I was calling the temp agency to let them know how it went. I couldn't get through. So then they called me back. And I said, hey, I'm on my way back from the interview. I think it went well. They said, yeah, they just called. They want you to start tomorrow.
No.
Yeah.
Wow,
And that was,
congratulations.
Thank
Boy, what a
you.
great story that is.
On that note of getting out of your office. So my first week at Hasbro, I'm loving it because I'm in this great environment. And the CEO, who was in town from Rhode Island, where their headquarters was. So he's in Burbank, and I didn't know that he was there. And I'm in my cubicle doing something, and somebody walks by and goes, hi, Brandon. And I go, oh, hey, how's it going? And I'm saying hi as I turn, because I don't know who it is. Yeah. And I go, oh, that looks like the CEO. And it was.
Really?
And I thought, wow, he just saw my name outside the cubicle, and he said my name and hello. And I thought, that's pretty cool, because I'm probably the lowest person in the company as a temp. And I thought, wow. And so that speaks to just getting out of the office, no matter who you are.
Sure. And good for that CEO. A quick story, the best boss I ever worked for, and I'm happy to say it, is Mark Taylor at Nickelodeon Animation. Mark was the GM, and Mark was like a legend in the business. People left Disney and DreamWorks and Warner's. Everybody in animation wanted to work at Nickelodeon because they wanted to work for Mark. But you learn so much from these people. And Mark was naturally, he was a people person. But Mark did some things that were so unique. And one of the things he did, and I talk about it in my training all the time, and he knows I talk about it, is this idea of values-based leadership. And Mark would say, okay, you guys, you got a handbook, you got a policy and procedure manual, you got a collective bargaining agreement because they were union, and you got a code of conduct. He says, I want you to put that all on the side. I'm going to give you one sheet. And this one sheet has my 8 values on it. And I want to talk to you about them so that you understand what's important to me. Because I feel like if you can live your values at work, everything is just better aligned. And I'm interested in hearing yours too. But let me tell you today about mine and what's important to me. And then he'd go through this list of always having one another's back and bringing out the best in your coworkers. And these various things that he would talk about. It made such a difference. We just had no problems at Nick Animation. Everybody liked each other. We were at the top of our game. It's a fun place to be when you feel like it's all united, but it all comes from the top. And in that sense where Mark was someone who was a great people leader. And I can sit back, and I had written a number of books by the time I worked at Nickelodeon. And I'm like, I got to write a book. I mean, there was so much good stuff that I watched. Now, bad bosses are important too, because they help you define who you're not. And believe it or not, that's actually important as we grow in our careers. But watching Mark do it was just something it was beauty. It was great to see. And I learned so much from him, and I adopted it immediately, and I teach it today.
I'm just like connecting the dots as I'm getting to know you. And I am just seeing this theme of communicator, going from, even studying German and living in Germany for a period of time with the family. And then there just seems to be, and teaching while you're,
I was going to say, right?
Yeah,
right.
That there's this, and then employee relations is all about communicating. I mean, there's just something that's always been there. And that small detour when you were in high school about a potential Jesuit I mean, that's the type of, I mean, that's another communicator, right? Like that's always kind of been in the realm, like just within your natural skill set.
Yeah. And the funny thing too, is that informs who I am today. I mean, a lot of the teaching that I think the reason why people like my books and why they've done well is two things. First of all, I focus on the how. Everyone knows what to do. They just don't know how to do it. So when you say, resolve conflicts, promptly, yeah, that sounds great, but they don't know how do you open the can of fish. They don't know how to do this. So my focus has always been on the how in terms of how to open that conversation or whatever it happens to be. The second thing is, though, there's an element of spirituality in what I do. And it's not religious per se, but it's about getting people to wisdom. These messages are important because you can be a good person and still really, really excel in the business world. And I think that gets lost sometimes. We tell ourselves silly narratives. To be effective as a manager, you have to be feared. No, you don't. I worked for someone once who scared the heck out of me, and I couldn't walk and talk and chew gum at the same time. I was so afraid of making an error. Well, you study what is it that the CEOs are looking for, and survey after survey after survey, they want creativity and they want innovation. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not coming out of people who are afraid. Those people are just in a compliance mindset. They're only going to do what they have to do and no more. Mm-hmm. The opposite of that, I always tell people, if there's one thing you take away from any of my lectures, if you want to build a strong team, build people's self-confidence. If you can build your people's self-confidence, they will soar because you operate differently when you feel like your boss has your back and, your boss trusts your judgment, and you operate at a certain level when you're afraid of making a mistake. So which way do you want to go? So again, simple things, but it's funny. It does miss awareness sometimes.
In terms of awareness, at what point do you start to realize early in your career that you are approaching HR a little bit differently? That you're having, because you go into it, you don't know. Did you even know that this was something that people,
No.
are averse to? Like you kind of have to learn,
Yeah.
The how it's been the wrong way to go about it, and then sort of course correct. I mean, how did you navigate that?
That is a great question, Brandon. I'm very impressed with your interview. So here's the scoop. So here's the funny thing. So like I said, when I was at City of Hope, I had to figure out employee and labor relations. I knew nothing about that.
And what is City of Hope? I've heard of it.
I'm sorry. City of Hope is a cancer research hospital.
Right.
So it's in Duarte. It's right outside of Pasadena.
Okay.
And they were like world renowned. They're probably top 10
Yep.
in the United States. So very well known in the cancer research and clinical cancer treatment.
And you were called to be the deputy of
Yeah,
HR.
I was at the time, and again, this goes back 25 years probably, but I was director of employee and labor relations. Mm-hmm. But when you have to figure it out, as long as you're doing it with a mind's eye towards how can you help and what's the gift that you have to give forward and how can we reinvent this stuff, all of a sudden you can kind of create your own little domain and you do it a certain way and people feel better about things. So I don't want people to feel like you've been written up and you've been disciplined. Do you have to write them up? Yes. But how you do it becomes different. If you're doing it from a coaching perspective and trying to give them some kind of career insight that's going to help them through their career, and you put that in your documentation, they receive the message differently. Yeah, they still may not like the fact that they've been written up, but what was happening at the time was I was a one-person employee/labor relations department at the time for 2,600 people. Now, they're bigger than that now, but at the time, I'm writing people up. I'm trying to figure out how to do this in a way that I would want to receive that message. And that became the book. And the book was 101 sample write-ups for documenting employee performance problems. And the book has stood the test of time because I think the idea is people don't want to feel judged. And people don't want to feel less than. And people don't want to feel like they're called out like a second grader by the teacher because they did something wrong and they're getting their hands out. Treat them like adults. Come to this from a standpoint of career and professional development. People will fix things because they want to, not because they have to.
At one point, do you start to feel like you have enough material for your first book? That there's a gap in terms of, this isn't available, this knowledge isn't available for other people. When do you start to feel that way?
Right about then, a little bit earlier. So here's a scoop. You remember, with a master's degree in German, everything is secondary literature. I'm always quoting someone else who said something about Goethe or Schiller or the Brothers Grimm or whatever, right? I wanted to become primary literature. I wanted to be the one out there doing the stuff. So there was a magazine at the time called HR Focus Magazine, which was published by the American Management Association. And I got my first article published with them. and I saw my name in this magazine, no longer exists, but HR Focus was around at the time. I was like, OMG, oh my gosh, I can't believe my name is here next to an article. Well, I ended up doing about a dozen articles for these guys, and I knew they had a sister division, which was called Amicom Books, which is the American Management Association's book label. And I said to the person there on the magazine side, I have an idea for a book. If I give it to you, can you pitch it to the people on the other side in the book publishing division? She said, sure. Okay, so one more story here. It was January of 1994. We had the earthquake, I think, the Northridge earthquake, if I'm not mistaken, where we live in Valencia, because we had just moved up there not too much before that. We had been bashed. We were 5 days without mail, shoveling stuff out of the kitchen and all that kind of stuff, right? Everything had come down. Everything had pickle juice all over. It was hard. We finally got mail about a week later. And of course, they had a lot of mail, and they shoved it all in the box. And I went out to get the mail, not thinking about it. That was my acceptance letter from the American Management Association. They were going with my first book. My life changed right then and there. And I always associate it with the Northridge earthquake because it was right in the heart of when we were going through all that craziness.
You get a piece of good news.
Did a piece of good news, yeah.
And how did it change your life?
Changed my life completely. The first book that I did, I slept with it under my pillow, but nobody bought it, which was okay for a first book. But I was doing a presentation in New York City for the AMA, and it was on interviewing and hiring and questions to ask. And someone came up to me and said, Paul, I'm an acquisitions editor for Amicom. I know you worked with so-and-so. He's no longer with us. But this presentation you're doing, have you thought about putting it in a book form? Now they're asking me if I want to put something in a book form, and I did. And that book is now, I think, in its third edition, still out there, still coming in as a top 100 seller in the space when it comes to hiring. From there, when I did the 101 sample write-ups for City of Hope, then they came back to me, because that was my idea. Then they came back to me and said, you need something that's going to be 101, but a sister book on how to talk to people. And that became 101 tough conversations to have with employees. So this is kind of how it went. And I had a wonderful mentor. She's now since passed away. Her name is Adrienne Hickey. Adrienne was my mom when it came to teaching me how to do books and how to appeal to all. A lot of my books have numbers in them. 101 this, 96 that, 2600 that. That was Adrienne. She said, Paul, put books in your numbers in your titles. People like those. And the books that have the numbers in the titles have done significantly better than the ones that don't. So, I was just a kid. I was just figuring this stuff out.
Can you share an example of how to open or start a tough conversation?
Oh, I can. So what I talk about a lot in my training is always this idea of a circle. You just draw a circle and cut it in half. And on the top, you write the word performance. And on the bottom half, you write the word conduct or behavior, whichever you like. In a typical scenario, picture the salesperson, top performer, brings in 80% of the revenue in the branch, but tends to be a toxic personality. No one wants to deal with the person. Person is arrogant. Person is this, that, and the other. You can have a conversation by just taking the back of a napkin or the back of an envelope, drawing the circle, cutting it in half, writing the word performance on top and conduct on the bottom. And you can say, Brandon, the most important decisions in your career are going to be made when you're not in the room. That's the same for you as it is for me, as it is for everybody else. I think there's something that may be missing awareness that could potentially hold you back over the long haul when you're not in that proverbial room at some point in the future to defend yourself. Can I have your permission to share what this looks like from my vantage point from time to time? Now, normally the person just out of curiosity is going to say, sure. And then you can say, look, I want you to look at this circle that I drew. It's very simple. The top is your job performance. You are rocking it on the top half of this circle. You are consistently our top biller. Love the work that you're doing. I want to encourage you to, this is not why we're here today, but congratulations, because on the top half of the circle, you are rocking it. The bottom half of the circle, the conduct piece, the behavior piece, that's where I see some room for improvement. So let me just open this up to you real quick. Be as honest with me as you can. Do you feel like you are as strong in the bottom half of the circle as you are in the top half of the circle? And now you can have an honest conversation with someone. And what it's eventually going to lead to is, Brandon, look, if I can make you or you can make yourself as strong in the bottom half of the circle as you are in the top, your career is going to go through the roof. It's going to skyrocket. But the reality is, if you only define yourself as being good on the individual contributor deliverable side, right, on the performance side, opportunities could pass you by and you won't even necessarily know it. Because that closed door conversation is going to be, well, what about Brandon? He's an excellent, yeah, but he doesn't necessarily build trust with his peers. A lot of people kind of cut a white swath around him. They walk on eggshells around him. I don't think he's the right person to move into leadership.
And that it can be 5 seconds. In that room that we're talking about, someone just either open a door or close the door for that person. They'll never know. And it took all of 5 seconds to decide.
And that's how fast it happens. You're exactly right. So again, if you're giving them information that's packaged around career and professional development, I'm still basically saying you got a bad attitude, but I'm not saying it that way. I don't want to say it that way. That's going to offend them. It's going to make them feel judged and it's going to make them feel very defensive. And that's not going to get me anywhere.
Did you find that when you spoke to people like that, did they have that self-awareness where they're usually already aware of their own issues?
Yep. Yeah. Because they don't necessarily say it, but they know that what they've been doing is probably not cool. And finally someone called them on it. But the reality is it called them on it in a way that made them stand up, so to speak, that make them better, that make them see that there's a benefit in them. Because again, truly, if you're a top producer, my expectation of you is that you're going to be a role model for other people, that people are going to seek you out so that you can help them build muscle, just like you have muscle in that space. That's my expectation. So even if they say, Paul, I don't need you to coach me. I don't need your help. Okay, you don't need me to coach you. I won't. But my expectations remain the same. Going forward, I expect that you will make a role model of yourself, that people will seek you out and that people will come to you for help and that you're going to be there for them. If you can't make that commitment to me and you can't make that commitment to yourself, you might have to rethink whether we're the right organization for you. Now, I'm not afraid to lose a top producer because the problem is I call them rebel producers. They're great at what they do, but they eat their young. Your branch is never going to get any bigger than that one producer because no one else can build. You keep turning over everybody else. I don't want that. That's not going to work. Sometimes you got to bite the bullet, let that person go and start a new branch with new people. And it may take a year, but you're going to bring it up and you're going to actually exceed what you were doing with just that one person.
So what would you say if this ever came up, if someone asked you straight up, are you threatening me? That defensive kind of line of questioning. How would you diffuse that?
There's no threats. There's no threats. This is for them. This is opportunity, not obligation. And that's how I say it. If you see this as an opportunity to partner with me on this, it's cool. If you choose not to, I'll respect that too. But you need to understand something. As a branch manager, I need to set expectations for everybody equally. And I can't cut a wide swath around someone just because A, they've been here for 30 years. B, they're the top producer. C, they're the COO's son. I don't do it that way. That's not what I do. So I have to hold you to that same standard that I do everyone else.
And what are some of those issues that you would see that people struggle with in the workplace?
Oh, there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Well, think about the circle for a minute. The circle that I gave, the example is top performer, problem with conduct. Okay, switch that. Sometimes you have people who have stellar conduct. They bake the brownies, they break the cookies, they love the company, they volunteer for everything, but they can't do the job. You got to keep telling them the same thing. They're asking the same questions. They're not catching on. They're not taking notes. Okay, another use of the circle. You've got someone who was promoted to manager, but never made the mental mind shift from being an individual contributor. So they're a total micromanager and people don't like working for them. Take that circle and on the top, you can write the word individual contributor. And on the bottom of the circle, you can write manager or leader or whatever. And now you can have a conversation about them. And you can say, look, as an individual contributor, you're stellar. That's what got you promoted. Part of why I'm meeting with you is to celebrate that because you're doing a great job. But let's talk for a minute about the bottom half of the circle. Tell me about the management piece and how you think you're doing with that. Because as they say, what got you here won't necessarily get you there, right? This is now a new role for you. It's a new set of responsibilities. How do you think you're doing? And it gives me permission to enter into a conversation where hopefully, Brandon, they will make themselves vulnerable. And I mean vulnerable in a healthy sense. Vulnerable where there's enough trust that you can let your hair down and you can say to your boss, I know it's not working the way it should be. And I don't like this about myself.
what are things an employee can do to have a better relationship with their HR representative?
Just bring them food. You're always going to be fine. You can't lose. Just saying. No, so to your point, I use the sports metaphor. I have a book called Leadership Offense. I have a book called Leadership Defense, which is this idea of, from the management standpoint, do you know how to motivate, grow, develop, coach? That's offense. Do you know how to hold people accountable? Do you know how to have tough conversations? Do you know how to discipline, document, and all this other kind of stuff? All right, it's fine. Flip it for a second to your point and say, how does an employee do that either with their boss or with the HR team? With the HR team, I'm not too worried about it. You don't really have to. You're under no obligation to make a friend in HR. Not a bad idea, because it's just one more ally to have in your corner. And I think sometimes just going out of your way to say thank you is enough. Sending someone a little email saying, thanks for making it all so easy for me, and it really means a lot. That will make you stand out, because a lot of people, very few people do that, as I would say. So that's enough. Then the other question is the other question, how do I develop that with my boss? I mean, how do I become my boss's favorite employee? And that will come from teaching up. Don't just think that the bosses know everything and they can teach down well. A lot of bosses, honestly, aren't necessarily all that good with this, or they're awkward about it. Make it safe for your boss to feel comfortable. Volunteer before you go home at night. Just check in and say, is there anything else I can do? I was planning on leaving, but I want to see if I can take anything off your desk. Wow. Usually they're not going to say, oh yeah, here's all the work, but they're going to appreciate the fact that you had the awareness level to do that. So these little things make a big difference, again, because, they go through the heart, and that's where the impression is made.
So let's talk about interviewing, the interview process then. So for someone who's just graduating, so what's the best way for them to prepare for an interview? Because a lot of recent graduates are feeling insecure that they don't have the work experience. So it's almost like, what can they bring to the table? So what would you say to that?
What I would say is this: best advice, do some homework and make sure you bring up in the interview that you've done your homework. They want to know that you've at least looked at their website, and that you could look at any company and say, is it public or private? How many employees? What's their revenue base? What's their primary line of business? If you can't articulate that, and I don't care what level of job you're going for, you're going to be at a disadvantage, because it's going to feel like you're a cork on the wave. Like you didn't even take the time to look into what we do. One of the questions they're going to ask you is, why do you think you'd want to work here? You can't really answer that question unless you have some context around it and understand what the organization does. So I think that's one piece of advice. The other thing, and I've said this to my kids too when they were getting out of college, just be you. Just be yourself. Smile, laugh. It's okay to throw a little joke in there. Don't feel like, I've got to make sure that I give the right answer in the proper. It's like, you don't. What a recruiter is looking for is a recruiter wants to make sure that they don't make a mistake. Okay, I hate to say it, but I did recruiting for 6 years, and you live in fear. When I went into corporate human resources, guess what? I was still living in fear, because the bottom line is, if it's a great hire, the hiring manager takes all the credit. And if it's a bad hire, they point at me and they say, Paul Falcone gave us no one to choose from, so we had to choose this person. So I want to always, my standard was, I want to make sure, even if it doesn't work out, I can say, Brandon, look, I'm sorry this didn't work out, but honestly, I would rehire her all over again. She had the right credentials. She had the right this, that, and the other. And I'm sorry it didn't work out, but I hope you'd agree with me that we hired the right person for the right reasons, regardless of the outcome. As long as I can pass that smell test to myself, I was fine. So the logic then to the graduates now is, look, you wouldn't have the interview if you weren't qualified technically. What's going to make you stand out among your peers? And I think it's a matter of, can you make the recruiter feel comfortable? Can you come across as someone who's self-confident? Can you come across as someone who's human? They're not looking for Superman or Superwoman. They just want to know that you're a good person. You've already got the credentials. So to the degree that you can, calm yourself down and just understand something. You being you is enough that you need to do. Do a little homework. Make sure, have some questions, because they're going to say, what questions do you have? You don't want to say, I have none.
How do you answer that question of, do you have any questions for us?
Yeah, usually I would say 2 to 3 questions is fine. You don't want to have 50, but you don't want to have none. So some of the simple questions could be I understand the primary duties that we've been talking about the role. Can you share with me what some of the secondary responsibilities might be? Maybe things that only happen on a quarterly basis or half the year, but what are some of those ancillary duties? That's a good question. A good question could be, Brandon, I did look you up on LinkedIn. I don't mean to be spooky or anything, but I saw that you're here for 6 years. That's great. What motivated you to join the company? And what do you feel makes the organization stand out among its peers? People like to talk. Give them an opportunity to do so. So they don't have to be rocket science questions, but they shouldn't be filler questions. A filler question is, so how many employees do you have and what year were you founded?
Right.
It's like that you should have figured out on the website.
Right.
So
In
don't
the
ask
about
me that
page.
question.
Yeah.
Correct. You should have figured that out in the first 5 minutes. So again, ask questions about the recruiter, ask questions about the culture, ask questions like, if you could add or subtract anything to the background of the person who had this job in the past, what would it be? I mean, those are innocuous questions, but they show interest and they can give you some good insight into what's going on.
In terms of how the interview process changes as you evolve throughout your career, what's that like in terms of preparation?
No, well, again, it needs to be quantified more. A lot of times what they're looking at, by the time you're reaching manager, director, and VP, they're looking at your bullets on your resume. What have you done to increase revenue, decrease expense, save time, improve customer satisfaction? Roll out new systems, whatever it happens to be. And to the degree that you can say, we expect that this saved X amount in expenses or this generated X in revenue, or percentage-wise, we are now 14% below where we were year over year, blah, 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 blah. That's kind of where it changes. But that's something that you can partner with your boss on. What I would always tell people on my team, Brandon, was, look, you guys focus on building bullets for your resume, your LinkedIn profile, your annual self-review. My job is you come to me and we talk about how do we put some meat on those bones? Like, can we put quantitative things in there that happen to do with revenue percentages or whatever it happens to be? And if I need to get help from our CFO or whoever, I'll go to them, but I'll do that for you. I just want you guys thinking about an achievement mindset. I always tell my employees, don't think commas, think bullets. Bullets, again, increase revenue, decrease expense, etc. Commas are, I do phones, comma, filing, comma, correspondence, comma. I don't care about that. That's your basic job description. That is the minimal required to fog the mirror. I want to know, why are we a better company for your having done all those things? And getting in people's heads about what it means to have an achievement mindset is actually pretty cool. Because what they'll do is they'll cut through all the nonsense to get to whatever their goal is, because you've helped them set a goal as opposed to just finding reasons why things can't get done, which is the comma mindset. So again, a bullet mindset versus a comma mindset is a type of speech that I have in the book on the 101 Tough Conversations. This is how you get your employees revved up and thinking about these things. So
I love that. I love that. Now, you've mentioned Nickelodeon a few times. Could you tell the story of how you ended up there?
I was with Paramount Pictures for about, I think, 7 or 8 years. And I was head of international human resources. A friend of mine was the head of international human resources at Sony Pictures. He left to go to a private equity firm in Beverly Hills. He calls me up and he says, Paul, you got to join me. I need a number 2. They're insourcing the recruitment. No more Korn Ferry. They want us to hire all the C-level talent for their newly acquired portfolio companies. I'm like, whoa, that's actually sounding pretty good. My boss had left Paramount. So I was like without an anchor because my boss was gone. And I thought, you know what? I've been here like 7 or 8 years. Yeah, it's probably time. I got a big bump in salary, bonus target, and all that stuff. We went there. We were working in Beverly Hills in the, where your zip code is a brand, 90210. And about a year later, both of us gone. They decided to outsource again back to Korn Ferry. Apparently, we were not going fast enough or getting what they needed for these newly acquired portfolio companies. Understood. So now I'm looking for a job. What am I going to do? Turns out I get a call from Nickelodeon saying, hey, Paul, would you be interested in coming back here? Because we have our first opening for VP of Human Resources on the West Coast in about 10 years. But we thought about you. Would you come back? And you sit back and you're like, wow, how lucky can I be? So yes, I went back to Nickelodeon. I was only there for 2 years. And then I got laid off again. I mean, that's one of those things in the entertainment industry. This was 2008. Viacom, the parent company, laid off about, I think, 12,000 people because it was part of the mortgage meltdown or whatever else was going on at that time. But there were big restructurings happening. And unfortunately, I lost that. I would have stayed with them till I retired. I loved it there so much. but it's just one of those things. What can you do? So me, my boss, all of us were all laid off. It's just one of those things.
And when you were at that senior level at Nickelodeon, how did you personally prepare for that interview?
I almost didn't have to. I kind of, when you talk about building people's self-confidence, the person who reached out to me was the person I'd be reporting to.
Oh, perfect.
And she said, we'd really love to have you back. Would you come talk to us? So it was the easiest interview I ever had. And she made it so nice. And it was wonderful. It was really a very special thing. So,
and then about 2 years later, you're laid off, you said.
Yep.
So what's your mindset like at that point? How do you keep yourself positive?
Devastated, because I saw myself as a lifer. Now, at this point, I'd been in Viacom for about 10 years. And a lot of the people at Viacom have been there 20 and 30 years. So I'm like, I'm them. I want to be one of them. And when I got cut off at the feet, and I was like, I can't believe it. I had the best job in Hollywood. I still, have a hard time going through. It's like, I can't believe I don't work there anymore. I can drive past it in Burbank, but no one knows me there anymore. I can't even go in the building. But the funny thing is, you have to land on your feet. And I think what's really, really important, and I've had this discussion with my kids too, and both of them, my kids, I've got a 31 and a 34-year-old. They've both been laid off. They have both been knocked off the horse. And it's like, look, getting knocked off the horse is just a rite of passage now. It happens to everybody. What employers are looking for, and I was always looking for, is how quickly can you get back on your feet? And even to get a job in venture capital in the Silicon Valley, they want to know that you bankrupted something somewhere along the line, because they want to know that you're resilient, that you've got the agility to recoup from these things, because those jobs are tough jobs and you're at risk whether you're going to get your seed funding and everything else. They want to know you have that mindset. So I always I've told my kids, don't sweat that. That's okay. That is what it is. Now the question is, how do you reinvent yourself? So
at that time, what did you do? What did you do to bounce back?
Well, I'll tell you this one. What's so funny, Brandon, was for my son. I'll tell you that story first, and then I'll tell you with me, because it was the same philosophy. I said to my son, what can you do in the meantime? And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, I know you don't know, but if you did know, what would the answer be? Dad, I hate when you talk to me. Like, yeah, right. And what he ended up doing was he went on LinkedIn Learning, and he was studying digital marketing. And so he got a number of certifications from LinkedIn Learning that were right on his LinkedIn profile. And I thought, bingo, good for you. That was smart, because that's going to show a prospective employer that you're ambitious, that you're dedicated to your field and everything else. It was the same thing for me. When I was in transition, and again, my case is a little different, Brandon. I was fortunate. I had really good networks from my days of teaching at UCLA to my days of being a student in the HR certificate program. I'm writing for HR Magazine. I teach at UCLA at night. I speak at the conferences. I had network, and that is so important. So I was never down all that long, probably never more than a month or so. And so what happened for me didn't necessarily happen for other people. Other people took longer, but I would be the poster child for why it's important to have a network, because the networking really is pretty critical.
And not just the networking, but you've never just done one thing. You were working full time. You were teaching. You're an author. You've written many, many books, but at the time you were writing your first book, then your second book. So you were never just doing one thing.
Yeah, for me that was important. One of the things I'll tell you real quick was, in the entertainment industry, a lot of people were just entertainment HR. They went from Fox to Disney to Sony to Paramount to Warner Brothers, but they never worked outside the industry. And I used to tell people, get out, don't be a one industry anything. I was so lucky that I had City of Hope. I had healthcare, I had financial services before I went to entertainment. My last full-time job from 2017 to 2022, I was the Chief Human Resources Officer for the Motion Picture and Television Fund in Woodland Hills, which is the retirement home for the entertainment industry, for the actors and the actresses and the production people. Well, interestingly enough, they wanted someone who had healthcare and entertainment. Bingo. But the problem is, if you're only in one industry, especially if that industry is under threat, if the industry implodes, and our industry is having a lot of problems right now, it's hard, because other employers are going to say, look, you've been working in such cool jobs. We're plastics manufacturing. You're only going to come here, and then you're going to wait till someone calls you from the studios to call you back again, and then you're going to leave us. So again, the more diversity you have, the better. You have to have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. For me, that was always important. It was kind of horse sense. But a lot of people just go about doing their job every day and they don't think about it. That's missed awareness. That's something that from a coaching standpoint, I would advise people to be a little more cognizant of.
Ooh, I like that term, missed awareness. I like that a lot. And on the subject of just diversifying yourself, you've been in the financial sector, healthcare, entertainment. How transferable did you find your HR skills between those industries?
People are people. You know, a lot of times when a search is happening, they want someone who has exact experience. I understand that. All else being equal, if you're an investment bank, you want someone with investment banking experience. That's kind of a no-brainer. But the truth of the matter is, when I hired on at Paramount Pictures, they were desperate. And I'm always good. When someone's desperate, Paulie is like on the spot. And what they said was they had hired someone for this position and it really didn't go well at all. And that person left all of a sudden, and now they're in a rush and their backup is up against the wall. The woman who hired me said, you know, it's funny, Paul, you're coming out of City of Hope. I know you don't have entertainment, but my sister works at Cedars. And I know what she goes through dealing with MDs and PhDs and everything. If you can deal with that, you can deal with Hollywood directors. Bingo, I got the job. And she was right, because people are people and everything is demanding. But especially as you're earlier in your career, you got to give some people some room to grow. You don't necessarily always want to hire people with 120% experience. You want 80%. Give them some room to grow. That learning curve is important. It keeps people engaged. Trying to overhire is not necessarily a good thing. Same thing. You've got an opening for a manager. I wouldn't hire someone who used to be a vice president. I know they may be desperate for a job, and I'm sorry for that, but they did manager job 20 years ago. They've grown to director. They've grown to executive director. They've grown to VP. They're managing managers. This probably wouldn't be the best move for them.
And what's the fear behind that?
Again, that they'll burn out, that they'll be tired of it, that they're going to leave as soon as they get another job elsewhere at the VP or SVP level. And you can't blame them if they do that. That only makes sense. Meanwhile, everything you've invested into them, though, goes up in smoke pretty quickly, 6 months later. So again, I think we have to be realistic about setting our job expectations. Sometimes it means switching industries. Sometimes you got to take a cut in pay or a cut in title, but you're positioning yourself better. When I went from mortgage banking with a company with 800 employees to City of Hope with a company that had 2,600 employees, I left a director job to take a manager job. That looks like a step backwards. Took a lateral pay, so the pay didn't change, so that didn't look good either. But it was such a bigger enterprise. And my goal had always been, I want to work on the aircraft carriers. I want to work on the big brand name organizations. And when I got into City of Hope, I knew that they were enough of a brand name that I probably can go into other organizations of that caliber, and I did. And I always try to stay in that space because the name of the company does create an image. You know, on the back of my book, it says former CHRO of Nickelodeon Animation. That means something, and that was important to me.
So obviously, your work experience has inspired your work as an author, but how has being an author inspired your work experience?
Yeah, good, great question. They say teach what you choose to learn. Okay.
Wait, teach what you choose to learn. Okay. Yeah, that makes, okay.
So here's my story. So when I moved into international human resources at Paramount Pictures, it's something that I really wanted because I had my master's in German. I spoke some basic French as well, blah, blah, blah. I had no experience. So I decided, now at this time, I'm pretty well known at UCLA Extension. I've been teaching there for a number of years. They know I've taught a number of courses. I said, I want to teach the international HR course. They said, Paul, you can teach whatever you want. Okay. Meanwhile, what I ended up doing at the time was I invited people to be guest speakers, Brandon. I had an international employment lawyer, international employee assistance provider person. I had an international this, an international that, someone for Relo, someone from one of the big six, the big accounting firms, whatever it was at the time, coming in to talk to the students. Well, I was sitting in the front row. And they all, you know, when you ask people, would you like to come and speak at my UCLA class? How many students you have? Oh, 30. Well, that's 30 commercials. That's marketing. That's business for them. You know, the international employment lawyer or the person who does immigration services, of course they want to come and talk to UCLA. Meanwhile, though, I was building my own network with these people. I was the one in the front row taking all the notes. So while I was learning, quote unquote, the job at Paramount Pictures, I was learning the stuff at UCLA at night. Now, granted, I could research enough to teach the first hour of the class, but then I let the guest speaker talk for the next hour and a half, and it worked great. And everyone walked out of that class. Not only did they have an understanding of what's going on in Europe with the EU versus what's happening in Asia versus what's happening in Latin America, because I could teach that part because I had the books. But now they had a network. They walked out of that class 12 weeks later. Tell them whatever you need. They had people to call. They knew who to call. It was a beautiful thing. But you figure it out. You land on your feet. And that's just how it branded itself for me. That's how it worked out for me. For other people, they'll do it different ways too. But the learning piece is what I love. And you don't have to be a master to teach mastery. You don't have to be able to teach international HR by being an HR guru. All I had to do was go into that class, do a little bit of it, but invite the guest speakers to come in and really carry the load. And the students loved it. And it wasn't like listening to me as a talking head every night. They got to meet new people along the way.
Wow. Women get asked this question all the time. It's not asked often enough of men, but I'm always curious, when you were developing your career, how did you balance being a husband and a father?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's a very fair question, and it should be asked of both. Well, first of all, my wife is great. I married up. There ain't no doubt. And Janet always understood that, she was a teacher. She had a master's in special ed, but once the kids were born, Janet stayed home. She knew, though, that I had all the pressure because I had to do everything as far as the revenue piece for the family. And so she gave me that space. Now, I could be dad till 8 o'clock, but then the kids went to bed. Once the kids went to bed, I can move into mode of, doing whatever I needed to do as far as writing articles or writing book chapters or doing those kinds of things. I think she inherently understood that he needs his creative space. He needs his creative time. I'm going to bed. Paul, don't come to bed later than 1 a.m. because you're going to be a grouch tomorrow. But the bottom line is it worked. I never wanted to be an absent father. I wanted to be there for the kids. That was important to me. And as it was, I was working, 9 to 6 at the studios. By the time I got home to Valencia, it was 7:30. The kids go to bed 8:30. There wasn't a lot, but at least I had an hour with them. In the meantime, Janet was there for when the kids came home from school. And so we worked that out. But I don't have any regrets where I took time away from the family. But again, I had someone who was very understanding. My wife was the perfect partner for this stuff. She could find the balance of raising the kids, but also giving me the space to do what I needed to do because she knew I loved doing that. So it worked out well for us, I'm happy to say.
Yeah. And with all your ambitions in speaking and writing books and working as much as you did, how did you stop? How did you unplug? How did you disconnect? How did you stop yourself from getting consumed by all the things you could be doing? If you just spent a little more time or stayed up a little later, you could get that extra book that, how did you kind of moderate yourself?
Well,
or did you?
Moderate is the word. My wife always says, she says, your downtime, my downtime is going on the computer and writing a story. I love writing. And she said, when people like my father-in-law would say, what does Paul do to unwind? He doesn't play golf. He doesn't play tennis. Well, I go to the gym, but that's only for an hour. That doesn't count. But what does he really do? And Janet would say, Dad, you have to understand something. His sitting at the computer and building out his stuff, this is what relaxes him. He loves it. When I was a kid, I built all the model ships. That was my thing. I loved building model ships, got my nomination to go to the Naval Academy. I was really thinking Navy, but I love sailing ships and the intricacy. You lay out everything on the table. You get all your parts. You got your glue. You got your paint. Writing a book is the same thing. It's just a project and you're putting all the pieces out there. You're figuring out what the pieces are. Then you're figuring out how do you want to order it. And then you're figuring out how do you want to storytell. What's the story? Because people remember stories. You give them facts and rules and policies. It goes in one ear and out the other. You tell them a story, they'll remember that for the rest of their lives. So a lot of my writing had storytelling in it because I think that's what resonates with a lot of people. But that was my disconnect. It still is to this day. Sometimes my wife was like, you need to relax. Go to the computer. So,
go do a different kind of work.
Go do a different, whatever. But that for me was the creative outlet. It's like, that saying, there's no job that's creative enough for the human spirit or whatever. I love creativity. I love building stuff out of nothing. To me, it's creating that model ship, or it's creating a manuscript, or creating a business article, or writing on my blog, or doing those kinds of things. I just really enjoy it. As geeky as that may sound, that's just kind of my happy place.
But it's also something that's for you, and it's not for the company that you're working for during the day. So it's a little bit of there's ownership to it, and it's on your own terms.
And where I was really, really lucky, Brandon, Paramount, Viacom, Nickelodeon, they were okay with my writing for HR Magazine. The only thing they would say is, Paul, you have to put a little thing in here that says these are the ideas of the author and not of the company where he works. That was it. Other than that, in all the companies I worked, City of Hope too, they were fine with this idea of, yeah, do your thing, Paul, because it brings honor to us too. It's nice for us to be able to say that our head of human resources is also a best-selling author or whatever it happens to be. But I was lucky because there will be other organizations I know out there that would say like, nope, you can't do that because we can't have you splitting your loyalty or anything else. So that was actually a factor when I would look at companies. I needed to make sure up front in the interview that they'd be okay if I'd continue doing that. And there were actually a couple that said, no, that probably won't work around here. And I was okay with that, but I'd have to deselect myself. I couldn't pursue that any further.
Did you ever take any of those tough conversations you had with employees home with you, or did they ever, a conversation in particular, stay with you for a couple of days that was someone took particularly rough? How did you disconnect yourself from that, just the emotion of the workplace sometimes?
You have to sometimes. I mean, being in HR, the funny thing is they say, well, I want to get into human resources because I really like people. And I'm like, I'll give you 6 months. You're going to want to become an accountant because people will drive you crazy. It's hard. How do you separate yourself from this? I mean, at Motion Picture and Television Fund, just as a quick example, that's a retirement home. We went through COVID together. We buried a dozen of our residents. We buried 2 of our employees, both in their 40s. This is really hard. And people come to human resources because they need someone to talk to. You don't think about IT. I'm going to go to the sales department. You don't. You go to HR. I mean, right? This is the department that we're in. But how do you pull yourself back from those kinds of losses? Or when you go through layoffs and you had to lay off people who were your friends. These things are real. And I think HR people need to kind of find that mental health space where they can put it in a box, so to speak. You have to be able to compartmentalize. I guess that's the best way I would say it. Like put it in a box, put the box up on the shelf, and just leave it alone. And that's kind of the narrative. That's how I've explained it. Just leave it up there. You can come and get it anytime you want, but don't carry that box open with you all the time. Put the top on it, put it on your shelf where you can see it, but leave it there because you're going to have to heal from this one a little bit. And we all do go through that. That's true. When you're in the people business, it can hurt sometimes and you can be left very disappointed or very hurt or just feeling guilty. I mean, that's all part of, there's a little bit of a ministry in human resources. There really was. That's why I liked it. I didn't become the Jesuit priest that I was thinking of becoming. But what I say is, but the work I do in corporate America very much has a ministry where I'm touching people's lives, especially at times when they're vulnerable. My saying in all my books is leadership is the greatest gift the workplace offers because it allows you to touch people's lives and build their careers. There's very few things out there that allow you to do that. But when you run into people 20 years later in the mall who say, Paul Falcone, it's great to see you. I still think WWPD. What would Paul do? You taught me so much. I would never get to this point in my career if it wasn't for you. Boom. That's why you're doing this. It is not for the salary and it's not for the benefits. When you really think about leadership in its purest form, it's giving back. It's growing talent. It's making people confident in themselves. It's helping them become the best person they could be. You filter it through that even though you're going to be disappointed and you're going to go through hurt, there's going to be a lot more positive than negative in the long run.
And did it ever get any easier, those tough conversations?
Mechanically, yes, because if you say it enough times and, when you write it down, I'm a very visual person. When I can write it down and I can see it, I can literally see the words popping off the page in my mind. But I never wanted it to get too comfortable because you know what? If it's getting too comfortable and it's getting rote, you're missing the human connection. It hurts when you have to terminate somebody for cause, and it should. And for me, it's okay to say, I'm sorry that it's come to this, and I appreciate everything you've done for us. There are consultants out there that say, never say you're sorry. Never say you're sorry. It's not your fault. You're just doing what the reality is, wait a second, I'm not saying I'm sorry we've decided to terminate you. I'm saying, I'm sorry this is happening to you. But let me be there. To the degree that you're comfortable, make me your concierge. I will take your call, prioritize your call whenever you need me. What companies do, I always say, you're going to terminate someone, do it early in the day, early in the week. Tuesday morning at 10 is fine. Don't do it Friday at 5.
And why not?
Well, because what happens is people feel like they've been swept out of the company like they've never existed. And I hate to say it, but a lot of workplace violence happens on Monday mornings because to an unhealthy mind, when they feel like they've been fired, they have no one to talk to for all day Saturday, all day Sunday, guess what? Also lawsuits. Lawsuits are a tool of workplace revenge. They feel like they were stripped of their dignity and humiliated when they were the most vulnerable. And you know what? They can't sleep. And all those lawyer commercials are on at about 3 a.m. because it's cheap airtime and the lawyers want people who can't sleep. Call 1-800 blah, 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 and we'll go get your employer with you.
Half asleep, you make great decisions that way.
Yeah, right. And so the funny thing to me, Brandon, it's like, wait a second. Yeah, we have to terminate them. We have to separate their employment. I have never in my life used the words "you're fired." I would never do that. I would just say we have to separate ways, or we have to end your employment with us. Do it gently. You're still doing it, but the reality is people feel like, I always say it's like an iron hand with a velvet glove. Let them feel the velvet glove. You still have to do what you have to do. I get it. But how they walk away, how they feel about themselves is critical to me, especially when they're at a point where they're most vulnerable or they're frightened.
Yeah.
So,
because you could bet that's going to be one of their worst days.
It's going to be one of their worst days. They're always going to remember the day they were fired. So it's like, to the degree that you can make it comfortable for them, you can extend that olive branch. You can tell them, call me, whatever you need. I'll always prioritize your call. Those are golden words. Those are golden words. I had a manager earlier in my career who was quote unquote teaching me things. And as I was watching her, it made her nervous to terminate people. But what she would say is, how she ended the termination meeting was, and by the way, if you're planning on suing us, good luck. We've got the best outside counsel in Los Angeles. That is not the way to terminate an employee. In that person's mind, they were thinking, well, this will make sure that they don't come back to sue us. But the funny thing is, to me, you're going to have a lot of post-termination activity because these people now feel like they were kicked while they were down. Don't bring up a lawyer during a termination meeting. You don't need to do that. So no judgment there. But again, like I say, you need great managers to be your role models, but you also learn a lot about yourself by having, I don't want to call them bad managers, but managers that you're not in sync with, because they help you define who you're not. And that's also an important parameter as you're growing through your career.
I want to pivot to a different kind of communication, and that's following up. I'm a big believer in following up. You hear a lot of people, they'll reach out to someone via email. That person won't get immediately back to them, or it'll take a couple days, or maybe, it's been a week and they feel like, well, that's that. How important to you is sending a follow-up message?
Remember I said how important it is to network? If people reach out to me and they say, Paul, will you look at my resume? And Paul, can I talk to you about my job search? My answer is always sure. Most of them are kind enough to follow up with me and say, Paul, great news. Got a new job. I'm starting as a blah, blah, blah on this date. I thank you so much for everything. But the ones who don't, that does stick out in my mind. When I find out on LinkedIn that I get the announcement that they're starting a new job, and I'm like, wait, you called me up and talked to me for an hour? Picking my brain, wanting my network, wanting me to review your resume. And you didn't even think to call me afterwards and tell me, just drop me an email and just say, Paul, I just want to let you know, and thanks for everything. Some people don't do that. That's a missed opportunity because it does feel a little bit like you were being used. So yes, following up is critical, I guess, is the bottom line. And it's only respectful, because when you're asking people to help you and then you get some great news, don't be like, well, I got the job now, so forget everybody who helped me along the way. That's a chance for you to talk to those 6 or 10 people who helped you and send them a quick note or a thank you note in an email or a LinkedIn post. That's all you need to do. You don't necessarily even have to pick up the phone, although that would be nice too.
Yeah, I feel like there's that missed awareness that you were talking about earlier. So what about the etiquette when following up post-interview, post-job interview? I hear some people talk about, well, if they wanted me, they'd get in touch. And I feel like there's a potential missed opportunity for reminding them that you really want that job. Because where do you fall with that?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you notes are important. Now, you don't have to do a letter that you're going to send them in the mail. Just send them an email. And again, it's an opportunity for you to say, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me. I really enjoyed our interview. I just want to remind you how important or how much I would love to work for your company. I'm so impressed with everything that you're doing. I think this role is an excellent move in progression for me in my career. And I'm very excited to hear about next steps. Thank you again for taking the time, and I'll look forward to hearing back from you at your convenience. All my best, Paul. Boom, that's it. It's 3 to 5 sentences, but remind them that you want the job. If you do, if you don't, then no need to do that. But I do think professional etiquette, the courtesy of sending a thank you note to the initial recruiter you talked to, the person you did your telephone screen with, the person you met with in person, whoever it happens to be. Yeah, send those notes. They make a big difference. Make sure you do a spell check. If you spell their name wrong, or you got it, then you just sank your boat.
That follow-up worked against you there.
Right, exactly. But again, assuming all else being equal, not sending a note is a missed opportunity. Because a lot of times, look, you're competing with 3 other people. 2 of them sent notes, you didn't. It's called the candidate desire factor. What I'm looking for as a recruiter is I want to know people who are hungry to join my company and work in that role. What I don't need is people who think I'm going to chase them if I want them. That's arrogant. I don't want those people. So I'm not saying I wouldn't go after someone who didn't send me a thank you note, but if that you can almost feel it, like you're lucky to have me. It's like out you go. Nope, don't have time for that stuff. I want people who are going to fit the culture, and I've never worked in an organization where they don't want quote unquote nice normal people. They just want nice normal people. They don't want arrogant people who think that they're the best thing since sliced bread. I think you kind of want to get yourself out of that headspace if that's a basic assumption you're making.
Something that you said a few minutes ago, where your last full-time job, was that in 2022? Mm-hmm. And so is that when you started your consulting firm full-time? So how did you make that decision to retire from the corporate world and go completely out on your own?
I was scared to death.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had been preparing for this for 30 years, just in
I
fairness,
believe it. Yeah.
Between the books and the magazine articles and the speaking at the conferences and all this stuff, I knew that one day I was going to want to do this. Having gone through COVID was kind of it. It was hard and losing people and everything else. And I just thought, you know what? Life is too short. I was, 58 years old. And my wife, who always had tremendous faith in me, she's like, honey, you've got to do this now. Don't do this when you're 65, because you want to have 5 or 7 years to kind of build your client base. Because she said, I know you. You're going to want to work till you're 90. And I said, yeah, I probably am. So she said, use this as the ramp time up. And I did think that was actually pretty brilliant. So I gave like 4 months notice, found and trained my replacement, no drama. That was fine. But I was scared because now it's like, okay, now you have to eat what you kill. And I'm not sure of how I can do this. What happens if no one wants to work with me, right? You go through this, like, what's the revenue model going to be? But I have to say, where I was really lucky, Brandon, is first year was great. Second year was great. Third year now, I'm beginning the third year. It's a little off to a slower start, but I think there's been so much change and wildfires and politics and all. I think companies are sitting back saying, well, wait a second, let's just see what we're going to do first before we spend money, which I understand that. But it's been great. And I'm doing the stuff that I love doing. And, there's an argument that says you could have done it earlier, you should have done it sooner, but no, I wasn't ready for it. I had to do this when I was ready. For me, the kids had to be off the payroll. Do you know what I mean? I didn't want to have college tuition coming up while I was doing this. It had to be the right timing. It felt like the right timing. I had my wife in my corner, and we said, you know what, we're just going to go for it. Knock on wood. I'm really glad that I did. I'm having a blast.
And what kind of clients do you have? What industries?
It's not, okay. I'm open. When you think about doing management and leadership training, like in-house workshops, speaking at conferences and doing keynote speaking, which can be anywhere, and doing executive coaching, which is mostly remote after the initial meetings, you can pretty much do anything. But I've got some really cool clients. I mean, I sit back and I pinch myself sometimes because whether they're, big law firms, aquariums, hospitals, a lot in healthcare biotech. That seems to be what's keeping me the busiest right now is healthcare biotech. But again, so many of them are in that hockey stick mode where they're growing, and they're expecting to really take off. Now they want to get their teams aligned. And so now it's time to call in Paul Falcone, right? It's that kind of thing where Paul can talk about these best practices in leadership, and we can help define, do the little exercises. What do we agree with? How do we define ourselves? What do we want to make our priority going forward? But they want to align their management teams. That's where I think the management training piece comes in the most, because they know that they're going to scale, and they're going to scale pretty aggressively. And they know if they don't, even if they're coming up to an M&A, right, merger and acquisition, they need to make sure that their team is tight. And so my job is to go in and work with that management team and get them talking. not only about what they're doing within their teams, but how they're communicating across the enterprise, what I call cross-pollination. Most organizations feel like they're not good at that. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. My job is to sit there and talk about, okay, how do we change that? How do we increase the way the cross-collaboration is happening? What could it look like in your organization? But then it's on them. So part of it is management training, and part of it is really facilitation, because every company is going to do it a little bit differently. And that's where the creativity comes in.
And so that's when your background across multiple industries really comes into play now, right?
Yep, exactly. Exactly.
I have to ask you, because you mentioned COVID and now we're in a post-COVID workplace scenario. What do you think of the hybrid workplaces?
I think they're here to stay. I think the reality is there's two reasons. Number one, when you studied Gen Y, Gen Z prior to COVID, one of their priorities was work-life family balance, control, equilibrium, whatever you want to call it. So this preceded the pandemic. The pandemic gave us just-in-time technology that said, hey, you know what? You can keep the wheels on the bus and still get this done, and they don't have to physically be in the office. Now, I think we're going to settle in a hybrid where it's probably going to be, my best guess, either a 4-day-a-week, 10-hour-a-day situation, the 4-10 work schedules, where they're still working 40 hours, but they only do it Monday to Thursday, as an example, or whatever day. And or the company is going to be at the maybe 3 days a week we want you in, but it's going to be Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, because when you're in, we want everyone else to be in for the collaboration and the team building and getting to know one another. So probably 3 days to 4 days a week, the company's going to move back to a sense of normal, but I don't think it's ever going to move back to 5 days a week because it doesn't have to. The second part of the answer is talent scarcity is with us for the rest of the century. When you talk about the big picture of what's going on out there in the industrialized nations, by 2030, 2040, into 2050, whether you're talking about China or the United States or Japan or South Korea or whatever, talent scarcity is here for the rest of the century. Really good book on that. It's called The Next 100 Years by George Friedman. It's a New York Times bestseller. But you've got to understand these large tectonic plates. Basically, what we're saying is we need to make the job field bigger. If you're only going to try and hire people within 25 to 50 miles of your office, you're probably not going to get there. You're going to want to be able to hire people that live in other parts of the state, or maybe a different state, or it could be even a different nation. But as we move into a new AI world and the technology morphs and changes, to get the technology, to get the people, the human capital that you need, you can't just say, but you have to be within 25 miles of our physical building. So I think it's going to work for companies too, because it opens up the labor pool.
It does, but how do you think that affects the new hires who are trying to build their network and build their relationships and just be seen around the office? Go in, you happen to walk into the kitchen the same time the senior VP walks into the kitchen. I just feel, speaking of Hasbro, that first job that I had, and from there, I would go in every single day, which seems so weird now. It just does. And we'd have like early Friday. So we'd leave at like 3 o'clock or something, or 2 o'clock. But just how lucky I was to just show up and be next to my boss every day, just to form a relationship. I feel like the hybrid workplace, if you're a senior level, you're probably going to be fine. But for the up and comer, I don't know if they're going to be able to strengthen, to build those same bonds with the people around them. But maybe that's just comes at a cost.
You're 100% correct. And a lot of CEOs are thinking that way. With the CEOs, they call it productivity paranoia. That's the term. If I can't see you, you might not be doing work and you're taking advantage. That's not where CEOs are. There may be some.
Jamie Dimon recently.
Right.
Yeah.
But the reality is a lot of CEOs are thinking differently. If you want collaboration and you want creativity and innovation, that's going to come from people working side by side better than when they're doing it on a Zoom. Okay. There are some CEOs who think the same thing, like I would. When I was younger in my career, I loved the fact that running to people in the break room, my friends were where I worked. My mentors were where I worked. What about the younger gen? Well, when you think about Gen Z, the Zoomers, now they're 27 and under, okay? they're testing out as the loneliest, most isolated, most depressed cohort on the planet, even more so than the retirees in the retirement homes. And CEOs are worried about that too. And they're like, wait a second, we have an obligation to bring them back, right? Because they're the first truly digital generation, but with that digitalness came a sense of isolation. And how do you bring that back? So a lot of CEOs are doing this for all the right reasons. What I think the way I would answer best your question to me, Brandon, is if there is 3 to 4 days in the office where you can get people physically co-located and sitting with their peers, that's going to be enough. It is also a good idea to give people a little bit more breathing room so there is more of a work-life family balance. If it's a 100% remote job, that's tough. When you're in a satellite office and you don't see your people but one time a year or one time a quarter, that's really, really hard to integrate yourself into the team. And so that's where there's going to be some challenges. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I do think that genie is out of the bottle. And I think anyone who sits back and says 100% back to work or you're fired, well, you can do that, but you're going to lose a lot of people, and you're going to lose, even the ones who stay are going to lose that sense of engagement because they feel like their needs aren't being listened to. And again, when it comes to discretionary effort and this idea of people falling in love with their company, you're going to get a wah-wah. If you remember from Debbie Diamond on SNL, what was her name? Debbie. I can't remember her name. The character would go wah wah.
Yes.
Debbie Downer.
Debbie Downer, of course.
Debbie Downer. Yeah. So the reality is, to the degree that you can explain to your employees why you're doing this, that's going to work in your favor as a business owner. Let me explain. If you say back to work Monday, full-time Monday to Friday, or I'll take your resignation, you've just cut off your employees. Even if they stay, they are disengaged. If you say, you guys, I want to talk to you about why this is important. We know the stats on Gen Z. We want to make sure that everyone feels like they can do their best work every day with peace of mind. And we realize that's going to come from relationships and friendships and mentorships, which really work best when you're working side by side. There are limitations to what Zoom and Teams and Meets and everything else can do. So what we've decided is we're currently at 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I want to make sure that you're all coming in on the Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I don't want you, you can come in on Tuesday and Thursday, we're open. But the reason why I want everyone to come together is I want you to get to know one another. And I want you to build strong relationships with people, not only the ones in your department, but the ones outside your department. Because I think we're all going to communicate more effectively across the platform, across the industry, or across the enterprise. And we're all going to make new friends. And that's important to me. To the degree that you can explain that as a business owner, people will be like, okay, I get it. But I do see companies that are doing the wrong things. They want 3 days a week, but people come in scattered. Well, that doesn't do anything. Yeah. Or the people, you got to come in on Wednesday, but everyone takes the meeting from their office on the Zoom. It's like, the whole purpose of having you in here is so you sit side by side. Don't take the office meeting from the Zoom camera. That's silly. So companies are still trying to navigate how to do this the right way.
Yeah, you're not coming in for the meeting. You're coming in so you can sit next to the person in the meeting.
Correct. You're coming in for the relationship.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
Yeah. Paul, this is something I ask every guest. It's called the rule I break. Mm-hmm. Every industry has rules. Some are there for a reason, and some are just begging to be broken. So what's a rule in your field that you don't follow or believe in?
Well, HR people, they're all rule breakers.
Yeah.
That's just what we are.
What can you say?
Okay. It's a good question. I've always been more about, make sure you ask for permission, don't ask for forgiveness, because that's drama. And I would always talk to my teams about that, because it's like, don't put me in that situation. I would never do that to my boss. I don't expect anyone to ever do that to me.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you. I've always been taught the opposite, which is great. And so I want to hear what the context that you're talking about for asking for permission first.
Asking for permission means coming to me, talking to me about what you're wanting to do, and me saying, God bless, go run, go do your thing. Tell me how it goes. Not me finding out from my boss, the CEO, that someone on my team did something that I wasn't aware of. That is a landmine that I just stepped on, and you basically plopped me on it and left me there as a victim. So the reality to me is, look, I'm not there to tell you, no, you can't do things. Sometimes I will, be honest, if it's really not making any sense. But I want I want for you what you want for you. Nothing more, nothing less. I've told this to my teams everywhere I've worked. I've said it to my kids too. I want for you what you want for you. Not, I want for you what I want for me through you. There's a big difference. And people know it. If people feel like all you're doing is self-aggrandizing, everything you want, all the kudos, you want all the pats on the back, you don't really care about your employees, it's just a matter of what they can do for the company, you're going to lose them. They're not going to perform well because they feel like you're not being sincere with them and you're not putting their needs first. Remember, they've studied these gens and they want to work for a management team that cares about them personally. That means that you care about them personally, not necessarily like, I don't care about you, I just care about what you can give to the company, right? Mm-hmm. So it's that sort of idea. So the idea is when it comes to breaking rules, though, to go back to your original question, Brandon, in my mind, HR people sometimes come across as too black and white. My advice, and again, doing the kind of HR I do now, I don't do HR compliance and HR audits. That's different. That's all a compliance mentality. I get it. But basically, when you're doing employee relations and labor relations, you need to be in the gray. If you are not in the gray, you are missing that there are two sides to every story. Too many people just want to push it. They don't like gray. Push it to the black or the white. It's either right or it's wrong. It's like, no, wait. You're not truly listening because each person has logic to what they're saying. No one comes to work every day and says, boy, I'm really going to try and mess up and get fired. That's not what they do. They may do other things, but that's not the end result they're looking for. But you know what I'm saying? The reality is you've got to kind of be in the gray. And sometimes I've got operational managers and leaders that are very black and white. And it's like, I need to coach them a little bit. It's like, look, I hear where you're coming from, but there's two sides to this story. And I feel like you won't only want to hear one side of it. And they're like, you're the HR person. You wrote the handbook. You wrote the policy and procedure manual. I don't get it. And I'm like, yeah, I wrote those as guideposts. Those are guidelines for you. Oh, Paul, so you're telling me rules are meant to be broken. No, I'm not telling you rules are meant to be broken. Don't put words in my mouth. But you know what I'm saying. The point is the guidelines are there, but each case has to be looked at on an individual basis. It depends are the two most important words I ever use in human resources. It depends. If the person committing the crime or making the problem has been with you for 3 weeks, it's a little different than someone who's been with you for 30 years. You got to look at the context of what's going on. There's no simple answer. If there was a simple answer, just type it in the computer. They'll tell you what to do. You don't need an HR department. But hopefully you're coming to me because you want some wisdom and you want some guidance, and I can help you put your best foot forward while protecting you and the company, but at the same time helping your employees do their best work every day with peace of mind. That's what my goal is. I want them to feel self-confident. And sometimes the managers aren't built with that. They don't have the patience for it. And I understand that, but I tell them, I'll be that gene for you. You may not have that gene in your body. I'll be that gene for you. Let me help you through this. And the funny thing for me, Brandon, was where I was good was no matter where I worked, they always gave me the toughest clients. They gave me the ones that didn't like HR. They're like, Falcone, off you go. Those are the ones that I was able to develop a bond with because they could trust me, because they realized I just wasn't citing the book all the time. It's let's talk about what's really going on here. And let me see how I can get you what you want, but do it in a way that's still compliant and is going to be okay for the organization. And I think that level of flexibility is really, really important. People earlier in their career don't necessarily have it. They tend to be a little bit more, the rule says, the policy says. Mm-hmm. By the time you got 30 years of doing this stuff, it's like, yeah, I understand what the policy is. Let's really talk and let's figure out where you want to go with this. I want them to be vulnerable to me. I want to really know, put your hair down, tell me, open up, tell me what you really want to do, and let me know how I can help you. Don't look at me as the enemy. And that's how you build relationships.
As a certified executive coach, what advice do you have for someone who's aspiring and seeking mentorship?
The funny thing is, on the coaching side, a lot of times when they call me, when I get called into assignment, it's not because the person is not a good performer. It's because they have behavioral problems. They don't play well with others. They want to keep the person. She's the rainmaker, right? She's the one who brings in all the big deals. But the reality is people cut a wide swath around her, have a hard time dealing with her, walking on eggshells around her. They never know what's going to set her off and blah, 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 blah. So you hear the term KPI, key performance indicator. Those are how people set their goals around KPIs. When a coach gets called in, more often than not, it's for a KBI, a key behavioral indicator. We got to figure out what's not working in terms of their interpersonal communications with other people. So when I sit with someone, and one of the first questions I'll ask them is, be honest, would you want to work for you?
Ooh.
And you get silence and you get, ooh. That's exactly what they say, because it's like, no one's ever asked me that before. And I said, all right, there's no right or wrong answer and there's no judgment. Tell me, what do you think? Or another way of asking that question is, if the whole company followed your lead in terms of your role model behavior and conduct, if the whole company followed your lead, would you be happy with where you took it? And I want to ask questions that are going to drive career introspection. My job as a coach is to do two things: to raise their level of self-awareness and to raise their level of self-confidence. And that's where you got to open up these conversations with people.
It also seems like you're speaking to them in a way that probably no one has ever spoken to them before.
Yep. The good news about a coach is I don't work for them. Okay. It's like whatever you're doing, it doesn't affect me. My job is to speak truth to power. You happen to be the power right now. I happen to be the truth, but you've got to let me in. And you've got to, if you really want to do that, are you sure you want to do this? Are they telling you you have to do this, or do you want to do this for yourself? And oftentimes they'll say, no, I want to do it for myself. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But in front of me, that's what their answer is going to be. And I'm cool with that. But again, it's raising self-awareness and it's building self-confidence. Boom, drop the mic. That's really what coaching is all about. But a lot of times, even the most successful people who moved into the highest levels of management, they've never had this kind of training. They've never had this kind of coaching before. They're like, what is this? Are you a shrink? And I'm like, nope, not a shrink. And I only want to go about 1 inch deep. I'm not looking to go down 10 feet of water over here. I just want to keep it about your relationship with your people in the workplace. And that's easier for me because it's something that I feel very confident and very comfortable with. So I can give that guidance pretty easily.
This has been great. Before we go, I love to do a rapid fire
I don't want to go.
round.
I don't want to go. I'm loving this interview. You're a great interviewer.
No, thank you. Thank you. This has been a real pleasure. But we're not done yet. So I like to do a little rapid fire round, 5 questions. First thing that comes to mind.
Sure.
What's the last book you read?
I'm reading a book right now. In the Garden of Beasts by Eric Larson, I think is his name. But yeah, it's a historical. I usually read business, but right now I'm reading a book on history. Again, Germany and it was about an American ambassador in Germany at the time Hitler was coming to power. Fascinating book. In the Garden of Beasts.
And it's a German. Yeah.
It's got some German in it. No, this book is in English. I couldn't read the whole thing in German.
Oh, no.
I've lost my chops. I can't do that, Brent. But yeah.
What's the movie you love rewatching?
Mrs. Doubtfire.
Love it.
We love it. That is like we know the kids too. We know every line in that movie. We have watched it a million times.
It's a great family movie, right? That was the same for me.
It really is, yeah. And it has so many elements to it. We love Robin Williams and we love Sally Field. A beautiful movie. So, yeah.
If it wasn't this, what's another career field you could see yourself in?
Well, interestingly enough, I was thinking about going down the path of becoming a Jesuit priest. I mean, I as an adult, I think about that, and I'm glad I went the path that I went, but I can certainly see myself doing that. I had gotten my nomination to go to the Naval Academy. I was thinking going a military career, but as I think of myself now, that probably wouldn't have worked as well. But those are the kinds of things. I mean, they're all, it's people-oriented, it's leadership-oriented, it's communication-oriented, but primarily I love teaching. And so teaching can find its way into those environments pretty easily.
Worst piece of advice you've ever received?
Make sure people are afraid of you. Make sure people fear you, because if they fear you, they'll respect you.
Best piece of advice you've ever received?
Just be yourself. The bottom line is you don't have to impress anybody. You just have to be comfortable in your own skin. Don't overthink things. And just know that people are looking to hire in their own image. They want to hire someone who's nice and cool and someone they can get along with. So just be yourself. And if it's not meant to be, not meant to be. But if it is meant to be, you are honest about who you are and you can be yourself. And that makes life easy for everybody.
Where can people find you or learn more about your work?
I'm glad you asked. Okay, so Paul Falcone is the name. And my website, listen to this one, paulfalconehr.com. If anyone wants to send me a LinkedIn invite or anything like that, Brandon, I'm Paul Falcone1 on LinkedIn. So that's easy enough. And pretty much the website is how people usually reach out to me. So,
Paul, this was an absolute pleasure to sit down with you. I really appreciate your time and thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for asking me about my story. You're a wonderful interviewer and I really enjoyed this podcast. Thank you.